Welcome back to the shop. This is video number 1 of a 3-part series on how to jet or tune in your carburetor on your 2-stroke motocross bike. In part 1, we will be discussing the Keihin PWK38S carburetor that's found on your YZ250 2-stroke from 99 to current, your YZ125 from 2022 to current, and various KTMs throughout the years. Part 2 will be the introduction to the Keihin TMX carburetor. That's found in your YZ125s all the way up to 2021, as well as a ton of KTMs. And part 3 will be the strategy of jetting in your dirt bike, getting it jetted in perfectly well. This is the Keihin PWK38S introduction. First thing we're going to do in this video is we're going to get the carburetor off the bike. I'm going to show you the different circuits it has, different jets and everything. Just get familiar with the carburetor. Then we'll put it back on the bike and I'll show you the easiest way to access all these jets while the carburetor is still on the bike. So let's go ahead and start working on getting this carburetor off. Now, as you know, there's more than one way to skin a cat. On the YZ250 2-stroke, you can force this carburetor out from here with the boot, with the 2 boots right here. Just kind of twist it and work it out, but it's really a pain in the butt to do it that way, and I don't like to do it that way. I would rather lift the subframe up and get that out of my way and have full access to get the carburetor out. So let's go ahead and do that. I'll first start by removing the seat and the right side number plate and take the silencer off so that I can swivel the subframe up. Alright, what I've done is I removed the subframe bolt down here in the bottom, and also the one on the other side down in the bottom, as well as the number plate there and the silencer. Now I'll loosen up the clamp on the back here. These steps can be followed too on the KTMs. It's pretty much the same way. You just get the subframe and the rear air boot off the carburetor, and it makes it a lot easier. Okay, got that loose. Now I'm just going to swivel the subframe up off the carburetor. There we go. With access to the rear of the carburetor like that, we can see the slide in there. Watch, I'll give it throttle. You see the slide come up, and that opens up the air intake going into the reeds, which goes into the motor. There's a needle, that little bar you see in the middle going vertical, that's the needle, and I'll show you that better when we get the carburetor out of the bike. But that's what happens when you give it throttle. It opens that slide up, allows air to come in, and the needle lifts up out of the hole there, out of the ventura and the jet, and allows gas to flow in as well. So let's continue to pull this carburetor off the bike. Since I am removing the carburetor off the bike, I will need to disconnect the power jet and the throttle position sensor over here. So let me see if I can get my fingers in there and get that disconnected. Alright, I got both of them disconnected, so now we can move back over to the other side. I'll go ahead and pull the fuel line off now. Loosen up the front clamp here so we can swivel the carburetor towards us. Might have been easier if I removed the tank to do this, I'll be quite honest with you, but I didn't. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to loosen up. You see where the cable goes in right here, the throttle cable? I'm going to loosen that up all the way so I can continue turning the carburetor a little bit sharper here. That's just going to allow me to swivel this carburetor even more towards me so that I can take the slide out. So let me go ahead and pull this out all the way. Okay, I got the throttle cable all the way loosened up. Now I can swivel the carburetor all the way towards me. There we go. And I can get these Phillips out the top. There we go. One tip I have for you guys is, you see the lock nut right here for the throttle cable? This is like a secondary adjustment for your throttle cable. The primary is up at the throttle itself. You can adjust the throttle cable tension up there at the throttle, and then this is like a secondary adjustment. I like to go ahead and bottom that nut all the way down. That way you'll see later on when we start making jetting changes, It makes it easier where you don't have to sit here and find the correct adjustment every time you swivel the carburetor like this. you can just bottom it back out and go. So what I do is I make all my adjustments up at the throttle, not down here. I just bottom this out completely, so when I make adjustments, all I have to do is just crank it down and keep moving forward. So anyway, I got that loose. What I'm gonna do now is slide this up and out. You'll see it has this little, that's for your throttle position sensor. So, and they give you these nice little, oh, let me get this out of the way for a second. They give you these nice little ridges right here to kind of help your finger grab that and move that along. So that's pretty cool. All right, let me swivel the carburetor back up, move this out of my way right here. And actually I'm gonna get that off the carburetor now. So to get this off, first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna screw this back on all the way. That's gonna give me more room to slide the so I don't have to fight the spring as hard. You'll see what I mean in a second. Alright, I have that bottom back out again. Now I take this spring here and I slide it up like this, and it has this little plastic cup on it. Slide it up, the cable latches there. You have to push the cable, you see I'm pinching the cable right here with my fingers and holding the spring up too. You push the cable down and then out that slit. It's not necessarily easy, but there it is. Now what I'm going to do is slide this spring all the way off here. So we have the spring and we have the slide. Let me set that on the bench. We'll look at that in a minute on the bench. I'm going to go ahead and take this off too, so that on the bench we'll have a complete carburetor. There you go. Nothing but a throttle cable. Alright, time to pull the carburetor off the bike. Now I will admit it is even easier if you remove the shock off the bike, but a lot of times you don't have to. I'm going to pull it off without removing the shock. To get it off without removing the shock, move the camera over here, you really do have to find that sweet spot. They barely slip out of there. But there it is. Yeah. And we have the hoses. There we go. We got the carburetor. Let's take it to the bench and take a look. There's the carburetor off the bike. I'm going to go ahead and slide the spring and the slide back in real quick, just for illustration reasons. So remember I pointed out you got this little thing right here for the throttle position sensor. You just pull that up, drop down in there. I'll put the spring in there. I don't have a throttle cable to put on it right now. It's on the bike, but that's okay. And let me put the screws in there and screw that down. Alright, so this is the Keihin carburetor. A quick rundown of what each thing does. Obviously you should know by now it says choke right there. That's your choke knob. But right down here, this is your air screw adjustment. And the reason it's called the air screw adjustment is because as you turn this outward, which is counterclockwise, it's going to lean out your air-fuel ratio. Like on the 4-stroke bikes, they call it a fuel screw. That's because as you turn it outward, counterclockwise, it adds more fuel. This is an air screw because it actually leans it out. When you turn it counterclockwise, it leans out your air-fuel mixture. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later on in the third part of the video. But and over here is your idle speed adjustment. That all this does right here, this little black, has a flat head on it. All that does is the slide here. It just starts cracking the slide open on the carburetor. I can't get my fingers in there right now. Let me see. There you go. All that does is it just cracks the slide open to allow more air, and it's no different than if you're on the bike and you just crack your throttle ever so slightly. Just get the idle. That's all this does. Same thing. It just cracks the throttle open, and again that controls the air-fuel ratio. It adds more air as you turn it in counterclockwise, mainly at idle, but we're going to get that to part 3 in the video. On the other side of the carburetor here, well, you don't really have much. You have your power jet right here, and we'll talk about that too in the third part of the video series. And then right here you have a throttle position sensor. Now this is an adjustable sensor, so if you ever loosen this up, it can swivel and it can be adjusted. There is instructions in the manual. I'll have a link down in the description here where you can download the manual to your Yamaha bike. If it's a KTM, you'll have to get your manual somewhere else. But the Yamaha manual does have instructions on how to dial in your throttle position sensor. But if it's never been touched before, and there's just no reason to touch it. As long as it's working good, and we're going to assume yours is, there's no reason to touch it, there's no reason to adjust it, and there's nothing to gain there, so just leave it be. The power jet part of the carburetor right here, it's going to squirt its fuel in right here, and what this does is it's more at half throttle or more, below 8,500 RPMs, it applies more fuel. And the reason being is not because it needs more fuel down there, but so that they can focus all the jetting on more of the top end. So after 8,500 RPMs, more than half throttle, it will shut this off and close the power jet over here, and stop that fuel from coming through there, which will lean the mixture out for more top end pull. But again, we're going to discuss that in part 3 when it comes time to jet these things in. I'm just trying to get you familiar with what these things are on this carburetor. So trying to keep focused on what you need to know to jet these in. I'm not trying to teach you everything about the carburetor, just what you pretty much need to know to get them jetted in properly. So I'm going to try my best to stay focused on that. Let's go ahead and take the float bowl off. Let's see what's underneath there. To get the float bowl off, there's 4 Phillips screws here, so I'm going to remove them. Alright, I have the 4 Phillips screws removed, so now I should just be able to pull the float bowl right off. Now, this carburetor is a virgin, by the way. This has never been off. This bike has 160 hours on it. This is the first time I ever pulled the float bowl off. There's your float bowl. You have a gasket, rubber. It's a resealable one, so for the most part, it can be reused until it gets so old and gets hard, and then you'll have to replace it. But as long as yours is still healthy, this one appears to be, you can just pop the float bowl off and put it back on. And we have the float bowl itself. You have the floats here. You can see these things. They look like a set of nut sacks or whatever. So that's the float. You have the float needle. Let me get something to point with. Okay, here we go. You got the float needles right up in here. I'm going to show you that in a minute here. That's your main jet right there. It's a 6mm hex. That's your main jet. Your pilot jet is up in that hole right up in there. I don't know if you can see it. There it is. It's a flathead to get that out. And lastly, you have a power jet. That's right there. It's a really small little flathead screw to get that out. But that's your jets. Again, one more time. Your power jet, your pilot jet, and your main jet. And now I'll go ahead and remove the float here. All you got to do, there's a little pin there. You just slide that out. Set that aside. And you lift this up out of there. There's a needle on it. It usually, here I'll show you, let me set this over here. See the needle right there? There's your float needle, so if you ever have to replace that, you know where that's at. And it goes right into that little hole right there. But let me go ahead and put that back together, and I'll show you how to adjust your float bowl real quick, just in case you have to do that. Alright, I have the float bowl back in there. By the way, the pilot jet, the little flathead one that's in the hole here, that's what that looks like, just to give you an idea. And but we're going to cover most of that in section number 3 of this, part 3 of this video series. But while we're on the topic, this is the only thing I'm going to show you how to adjust in this whole video, because all the other adjustments will be for video number 3, is the float bowl, because you should only have to adjust this one time and be done with it. So slide that pin out like I just did a minute ago. I'm going to do it again, and pull that on out. Then you pull the whole float bowl out here. You'll see the needle sticks there because it has a little clip that kind of holds it on there. Let me slide that off and out of there. There we go. Alright, now you'll see the tip of this needle is spring loaded. You see that right there? That is a spring loaded tip. So I'm going to go ahead and put that back on in here. You have to put that little hanging piece over it first, where the spring part is what's touching it in the tab over here, and we'll drop it back in the float bowl. But before I do that, if you have to make any adjustments, your adjustments are going to be on that metal tab. They're going to be made right here on this metal tab. You're going to bend that a little bit in or out to get your float height a little bit higher or lower. And let me get the focus again here. There we go. So it's that little tab that you bend to make your adjustments. So let me go ahead and put it back on the bike. I'll show you the proper way to adjust this, and then the quick, easy way to adjust it. Alright, let me slide this back in. get it in there. Come on now. There we go. Okay, here's a proper way to adjust it. Let me get the manual out for you. Here's how you adjust it according to the manual. They're showing the carburetor upside down there, right here. So they're showing it like this, and you can see that that's sticking out right there. And what they're saying here is to measure from the mating surface of the float bowl right there to the top of the float. Now it does say very clear right there, the float arm should be resting on the needle valve, but not compressing the needle valve. What they mean is the spring, that little spring that I just showed you, should not be compressing that. And they say the adjustment for this bike, the YZ250, is 6.5 millimeters. So let me show you how that's done here. Since they said, okay, what I like to do is instead of doing this, you can see it compressed that spring, right? What I do is I hold the carburetor at an angle right there. It's sitting on the spring lightly. You see how it picks it back up? And then I check my adjustment. So I have this dial in, I have this set of calipers here set at 6.5 millimeters. So if I put it there and I look at it level, I can see that this one is in spec. I know it might be hard to get it on the camera here, or even see on the camera, but you can see that it is 6.5 millimeters. So this one's right. But a quick tip, this will always get you close. If you're wondering if yours is out or not, in most your Japanese bikes with float bowls, when it's resting on the spring needle but not compressing it, that float's going to be pretty parallel with the mating surface here. So you can see, there's a little bit of angle to it. Let me get it up close. I guess perfectly parallel would be like right there. But let me try it again. Let me get it off the spring here. So you can see there's a little bit, but typically you get it, if you get it like perfectly parallel like that, you're gonna be close enough on most bikes. You don't have to adjust it. Let me see how the other side looks, because sometimes one side can be a little higher than the other. Yeah, see, this side's doing the same thing, but it is at 6.5 millimeters, so it is good. So I'm going to leave it right there. But that's how you adjust your float bowl if you need to. If mine wasn't right, what I would do is I would take a flat head or a small pick like this and bend that tab either further down or further up, and then recheck it and see where it's at, and go from there until I get the proper float height that I need. Now, the reason I say you should only have to do this once, not worry about it again, because you really shouldn't be adjusting your float bowl height to try to make corrections to your air-fuel ratio. I know in extreme cases people have done it just to get by, but it's not the right way to do it. You should just set it to the factory and work around all the jets and needles and everything like that, instead of trying to change the float bowl height to get what you need. So just set it to the factory setting, set it and forget it. So now I'm going to go ahead and put this float bowl back on, and I'll show you some other stuff. Alright, so far I've showed you the main jet, I've shown you the pilot, and I showed you where the power jet is at. Now I'm going to remove this drain right here. This is a float bowl drain, but this is also access to your jets, and this is where, when the carburetor's on the bike, I'll show you that in a minute. I'll put the carburetor back on the bike and show you how to access them. This is where you can access your jets real quickly. It gives you the access to the main jet right there, and the pilot jet right there, so you can access that pilot jet with the flathead, and the main jet will take a 6 millimeter. You can use a socket and a ratchet, or just a 6 millimeter nut driver like the one that I have right here. So that's where you're going to access them jets. As for the power jet, you'll have to drop the float bowl to do that. But again, we'll be discussing that in the third video. Then there's one other adjustment, and that is your needle and needle clip position. That's going to be underneath here. So let me go ahead and remove that. Take that back off again and show you. Okay, I got to get the slide out of there. Come on out. There it is. Okay, on the slide here, you got your needle, and you have some needle clips that you can change to richen or lean out the needle. So this will take a 6 millimeters. Well, I use the same nut driver that I use from a main jet, and you just connected that and twist it off. There we go. And then you just slide the needle up and out of there. You'll see it has this clip right here, and it has some slots. Notice it's on the second clip from the top. these, you can make the adjustments here by just popping this off and moving it to the next clip over. The way I like to do it is I use a hard surface. I'm just going to use plastic right here, and I'm not going to pop this one off right now, but I'll show you how I do it. And I just set it down with that opening right there face down, and just press the needle, and you'll hear it pop off. And then when it's time to put it on, you just press it back on your finger. But as you raise the clip on the needle, it essentially lowers the needle in the carburetor, and it leans out the circuit that the needle controls. And if you take this needle clip and you put it all the way on the very bottom clip, then it raises the needle, and that richens the area that the needle controls. And you're probably wondering what it controls. Well, in your manual, it actually tells you right here. It has a little diagram showing you what each jet does and what throttle position range. But again, we're going to cover all this in video number 3. I'm just trying to get you familiar with the carburetor, so when you start sticking tools on it, you know generally what you're doing and where you're going. But we'll discuss all that in video number 3 when we get to actually jet these things. But let me go ahead and slide the needle back in here. And all you do is you just take this, you just kind of drop it on top. Take your 6mm, tighten it back down, and that part is done. So now I'm going to go ahead and put the carburetor back on the bike, and I'm going to show you how to access these jets while the carburetor is on the bike. So when you make your jetting changes at the track, you'll know how to access your jets quick and easy and make it as painless as possible. Alright, let's put the carburetor back on the bike. I'm going to start with the throttle cable here. Let me go ahead and put this thing back on. I'm going to screw it all the way back down so it gives me a little more room to get this hooked up onto the throttle slide. As for the throttle spring, you'll see there's a little tab right there. You see that little tab? That goes into that groove right there when we go to put it together, with the same groove that the cable goes into. So what I need to do here is put the spring on, push it over the cable like that, pull it down so just the cable sticking out. There we go. And then fish that little sucker right up in there. There we go, got it connected. Now remember that little tab on that plastic piece? I want to try to situate that little tab so it falls right in there. Sometimes you can just spin the spring. There we go. Alright, I don't know if you can see in there or not, but yeah, I got it. So remember that, because when we go to change the needles, that's how you're going to have to put that back on there. But now that I have that done, let me go ahead and loosen this back up so that the throttle cable can flex up on top of the carburetor, so I can swivel the carburetor when it's time to put the carburetor back in. Alright, time to slide the carburetor back up in here. Of course, you got all these hoses and stuff. I'm just going to fish them down there gently for now, and I'll straighten them out in a minute. Again, it's going to be tricky trying to figure out what it takes to get these carburetors in and out if the shock is still in place. But there we go. I got it. Alright, let me connect it onto the boot. Over here, I'll just push it back up on the boot. There it is. Alright, got all the vent hoses down here nice and pretty between the linkage and the frame. I get a little OCD with them. I like them to be like all even and stuff. Now I'll take the carburetor, spin it towards me. Remember the throttle position sensor little tab here? I'm going to pull that out with my finger. Let me get these hoses out of my way. And slide the throttle slide right up in there. If I can get it up in there with my 2 hands. There it is. And then you can let go of that, because that just rides on top of the throttle slide. Alright, and then I'm going to replace the 2 Phillips screws that hold that in place. Alright, got them nice and snug. Now I'll set the carburetor back in a vertical position and screw the throttle cable back in. And then I'll tighten the throttle cable up with a 8mm wrench. Alright, come on. I came over here to the right side of the carburetor. I need to connect the power the power jet and the throttle position cable. Yeah, throttle position sensor back up. There we go. Put that nice little pretty rubber, let me make sure we're on tight, yeah. Put the nice little pretty rubber boot back down on top of it. Tighten up the front hose, or the clamp for the carburetor here, where it clamps it down onto the reed cage. And now we can go ahead and slide the subframe down on top of her. Well, let's not forget the fuel line. Getting ahead of myself. Alright. Before I slide the subframe back down on top of it, you want to clean the boot, right here, the outer edge of it and stuff, so no dirt falls into the carburetor while you're sliding onto the carburetor. Because dirt likes to just sit on the outer edge right here, and when you go to slide in the carburetor, it'll fall into your carburetor. You don't want that. And anyway, now's a good time to clean anyway, because any dirt that I clean off here will fall straight down onto the swing arm instead of going up into the boot where the air filter's at, which will eventually make it in your motor. So it's a perfect time to wipe it up now. Alright, time to slide it on the carburetor. Here we go. Let's see if I can make this look easy. Let me go to the other side and try to work it on a little bit with a flathead. There we go. That's all I did on the other side. Is I used a flathead to just kind of help pry it completely onto the carburetor. And now I'll tighten up the rear clamp, and the carburetor's officially back on the bike. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put the subframe bolts back in, the seat back on, the silencer back on, and seat back on. And then I'm going to take a few minutes and show you how to access these jets real quick and easy while the carburetor's on the bike, so you can jet your bike in while you're at the track. So let me go ahead and put this bike back together, and I'll show you that. I'll be right back. Alright, got the bike back together. Alright, so this is how you change jets at the track. I'm going to start with the pilot and the main jet. The first thing that you want to do is loosen up both the front and the rear clamp so you can swivel the carburetor around. I'm going to do that. Next thing you want to do is take a 8mm wrench and up at the top of the carburetor here, remove your throttle cable from the carburetor. So let me go ahead and do that. I mean, you don't have to take the whole throttle cable off, I should say. Just loosen it up all the way. I'll show you what I mean. Let me do it real quick. Here's what I meant by the throttle cable. All you want to do is just loosen it up, like twist it like this. That way, it allows you to swivel the carburetor more. If you keep that in place, this thing acts like a tower on top of the carburetor. It bumps your exhaust pipe and stuff when you twist it this way, and it makes it harder to twist the carburetor all the way around. So yeah, let me twist it around. Of course, when you do this, you want to make sure your gas is off, because if your gas is on, when you turn the carburetor sideways, it's going to start just dropping gas. You don't want that. So shut your gas off. There we go. But yeah, by loosening the throttle cable up like that, it allows me to twist the carburetor all the way over this way. So let me get a different angle here to show you. We're going to... Now, if it's a YZ250 and it's got the stock guard on it right here, the chain guard, front sprocket guard, you're in luck. But if you have the aftermarket one, you might have to remove it. Or if it's a KTM, you might have to remove this guard. But if it's a YZ, you're in luck, and I'll show you what I mean. We remove the float drain here, and when you do this, if the carburetor's gas in it, this one don't yet, it'll drop the gas that's in the carburetor, but that's fine. Just let it drop on the motor, it'll be okay. Again, make sure your gas is off. They'll just drop that little bit in the float ball, and that'll be off. From here, you can access your main and your pilot using the 6mm nut driver. Here's the beat of the Yamaha. See that little cutout right there? It fits perfect. Allows you to get access to that main jet. And there's your main jet. Pop that back in place. And then you got the pilot jet. The pilot jet is the flathead one. It's right up in here. I'll pop that one off for you real quick. And there's your pilot jet. And to pop it back in, it's the same way. You just put it back in and tighten her down. Make sure you put them pretty snug. You don't want to strip them out, but put them pretty snug. You don't want to drop a jet while you're out riding. So that's how you access the main and the pilot while it's on the bike. Then once you do that, whatever changes you make, you reverse the steps, put the drain plug back in, twist the carburetor back around that way, and connect the throttle cable up. Or should I say, bolt the throttle cable back down on top of the carburetor. It's still hooked up. Just got to twist it back in. But anyway, we're going to do that in a second here. Okay, twist it back around this way. And now all I would have to do is just screw the cable back in right here. Put the carburetor back in the center position. Tighten up 2 clamps. And whatever jetting changes I made down there is complete. But if you wanted to get access to the needle clip, this is how you would do it. When the carburetor in this position right here and the throttle cable loosened up, you just remove the 2 Phillips screws on top. Again, you're still going to want your throttle cable unscrewed right there. Pull these out. And just slide her on out of there. There you go. And then, like you saw me do a few minutes ago, you just pull the spring up, disconnect the throttle, the throttle cable from the slide here, and use a 6mm to loosen up the part in there that holds the needle in place, and make any changes. And then after you make whatever changes you make in here, either a different needle or a different needle clip position, you just slide it back on by grabbing the throttle position sensor little bracket right here. Pop that slide back in there. It doesn't give you a lot of room, but you can do it. Oh boy. You guys are going to watch me suffer through this. There we go. Although everything's out of whack here. Alright. And now let me get the 2 Phillips screws and bolt it back down. Alright, I'm putting the 2 Phillips screws back in now. Then get the throttle cable screwed back in here. Okay, got the throttle cable screwed in. I'm just going to bottom it out, snug it down with the wrench. And like I said, the lock nut here, I just bottom it out on the whole cable, and I make all my adjustments up at the throttle. Let me slide the boot back down. And then center the carburetor back out. There's a little tab up at the front of the carburetor, right up in here, that matches the boot. It slides in a little groove there, and that's how you know when you have it perfectly centered. The tip I have for you is anytime you take the carburetor off or you twist it and you're working on the carburetor, changing jets, whatever, sometimes when you turn the gas back on, if the needle didn't get back up in its seat properly, it can pour gas on the floor through the overflow on the carburetor out of one of the overflow hoses here. So a quick easy fix if that happens to you, if you turn your gas on and it's dropping gas on the floor, quick easy fix is to shut the gas back off, start the bike up, and just run it on the stand or whatever, just blipping the throttle and stuff, and just run it for, you know, a minute or 2, maybe 3 tops, until it starts running a little bit lean, and then turn the gas back on. That usually fixes it. And of course, no job like this is complete without a test fire. I just did all this work to the bike, so let me throw some gas in it and give it a test fire, make sure I got everything right. 4Runner. Well, that's it for part 1 of the jetting series. This was just an introduction to the Keihin carburetor. Part 2 will be an introduction to the Mikuni TMX carburetor, and then part 3 is going to be jetting strategies, how to actually jet them in. I appreciate all my subscribers. If you're not a subscriber, it's free. Just click on the link down below, click subscribe. That way you'll know when new videos come out. Stay tuned. Next week I'll do part 2 of this video series. Not sure where I'm going to be riding at yet this weekend with the weather. The rain's kind of spotty, so I'm not really sure yet, but I hope everyone has a good weekend of riding, and I'll catch you guys next time.